She was my best friend. What about you? What are you doing here? We were gathered near our cells, and the other cellmates were sharing their stories about how they got there when Carla, who was also a fellow prisoner, asked me, "My best friend's murder." As I said that, they all looked with shocked expressions on their faces. "You killed your best friend? What kind of a person are you?" Carla looked at me with a look of disgust, which did not bother me at all. Others started insisting that I tell them the story, so I began. I was not very well off, and I used to work as a maid. Naomi was my neighbor, but unlike me, she was rich. She was a housewife, and her husband, Oliver, was a manager at some big firm. She was a nice woman, and we got along pretty well. She did not care that I was not a well-off person and treated me with nothing but kindness. She had a beautiful young sister, Margaret, who often used to visit her, and slowly the three of them became good friends. That was when I started to notice that Naomi's husband, Oliver, was not good to her. He often used to beat her and abuse her after coming home in drunk conditions. And one day, I saw him kicking her out after beating her severely. I took her inside and treated her wounds. While I was treating her wounds, I could tell by her face that she was extremely embarrassed that I saw her in this condition, and her eyes were filled with tears. I tried to comfort her by saying that everything will be alright, but instead of calming down, she started to cry even louder. I hugged her and asked her what had happened. She told me that her husband was loving towards her at first, but then he suddenly started to pull apart, and recently, he started to raise his hands at her. "Hey, you know what? Let's cheer you up. I heard one of the houses where I work there is a new sauna bathhouse that opened nearby." I called Margaret. "Let's head there, the three of us." While I was saying that, I knew that it was out of my budget, but all I could think about that time was my best friend was suffering. I had to make her feel good, so I called her sister and asked her to meet us there while I practically dragged Naomi there along with me. When we were there in the sauna bath relaxing, Naomi told us about everything that she'd been suffering these days. She told us that her husband was acting differently and that she was thinking that he maybe started cheating on her. Naomi could not sleep for the past few days because she could not help but feel doubtful towards him for his strange behavior. After telling us about this, she felt a bit lighter, as if some burden has been lifted from her head. "Why don't you make this our thing? Let's meet every Friday here, and we can share our burdens with each other," Margaret said. But I refused, saying that I did not have that kind of money. "Aw, come on, you're our best friend. We'll pay for you." Naomi held my hands and said, looking into my eyes with a pleading look, "Okay, fine." I rolled my eyes and agreed while the two of them squealed in excitement. We started to meet every Friday and shared whatever troubles we'd had with each other. And one day, Naomi told us that she checked her joint account and a huge amount of money from her savings was missing. We could not understand why Oliver had to withdraw Naomi's money, even with the position that he was working on. Either he'd been fired or his earnings were getting spent somewhere else. We encouraged Naomi to confront him about this matter, as if anything goes wrong, she could call us right away. Naomi did not call us after that, so we thought that she must be busy or something. And the next Friday, when we went to the sauna baths, she did not show up there either. So we went to her house to ask about her. But Oliver told us that she wasn't there either. He told us that he thought that she was spending time with us for the past 2 days. I could tell that he was lying, so as soon as he closed the door, I turned towards Margaret. "I'm sure he's lying. He's hiding something." Before I could say anything, she said to me, and I agreed with her. We decided to take the matters into our own hands and report him to the police the next thing in the morning. But the next day, we found out that he had already reported his missing wife. More than 15 days had passed and there was still no words from Naomi. So Margaret and I decided to check his house when he was not around to find some clues. So we waited for him to leave, and then we used the spare key that Naomi had given Margaret to sneak inside. We searched the entire house but couldn't find anything except that it was smelling like bleach, and the carpet in the living room also looked brand new. As we were looking around, we heard the sound of Oliver's car in the driveway and immediately left the house. We hid around the garden area and noticed him carrying a big suitcase to the house. After a few minutes, a model-looking like woman walked into the house. We could not talk there or in my house because I knew that Oliver would doubt us and he would play another trick like before. So we decided to meet at the sauna baths to discuss the plan. The next day, we met at the sauna, and as we were relaxing, I asked Margaret if she also thinks that Oliver might have killed Naomi. "What do you think about that?" From this question of hers, I figured that she did not think of such a possibility just yet. What do you think? The house smells like bleach, and a new carpet, and the mistress moves in when it hasn't even been a month since Naomi's disappearance. Margaret, I work as a maid, so I know that these rich people do cover up any crimes that they've committed. As I said that, Margaret's eyes teared up and hugged me while sniffling. I calmed her down, and we decided to report this to the police. The next day, I decided to go to Oliver's house to check up on the situation, so I went there and rang the bell. The other woman opened up the door, and then Oliver came from behind. I asked him about how he was handling Naomi's disappearance, but he looked annoyed about my question and rudely sent me off. I called Margaret, but she told me that the police went to her place asking questions about her involvement in Naomi's disappearance. After an hour or so, I was also called to the police station because Naomi's sister told them that the two of us were in the sauna house on Friday when we found out about her disappearance from Oliver. We also told them about my suspicion of Oliver, as he might be the one that killed her. The police went over to Oliver's house to catch him red-handed and to search his home, but they couldn't find anything either. I got frustrated and shouted at him, saying that he'd killed her because he was fed up with her and he used to beat her. How could you say that? I love Naomi more than anything, and I thought that she may have run off somewhere else, and I was just trying to move on. But you're saying that she's dead? How are you so sure? Wait for a second. Did you kill her? Pulled the trigger towards me, but I knew that he was lying and just trying to frame me. Police searched my house after Oliver asked them to, and shockingly, a knife laced with blood was found in the shower drawer of my kitchen. I never used that drawer, so I had no idea that he'd hidden that in my house, just to frame me. The police arrested me and sent the knife to the forensics labs. I don't know how he did it, but when the results came out, the blood was Naomi's, and there were faint traces of my fingerprints found on the knife. I asked Margaret to help me, and I told her that I didn't kill Naomi, but she did not help me, saying that she could not believe that I would do something like that. The police questioned me about Naomi's body, but I kept denying it till the very end. I was framed for the murder of my best friend, who I loved the most in the world, and was then sentenced to serve my time in prison. After listening to my story, Carla hugged me and apologized for saying that she judged me wrong. I nodded and went back to my cell. There was one thing that I could not understand, that except for Naomi and Margaret, no one else knew about the passcode for my house. And Naomi would never tell her husband. So how did he know? Was Margaret also involved in all of this? Is that how Oliver always knew what we were about to do next? But I was sure about one thing. I would not let them go, and I'd find out what happened to Naomi eventually. I will prove my innocence, no matter what it takes.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
One night in May of 2010, the Suffolk County Dispatch Center in Long Island, New York, received a call from a terrified young woman. When asked what the nature of her emergency was, the caller replied that someone was trying to kill her. In a display of brutal honesty, the young woman admitted that she was a working girl and that a call to a client had gone horribly wrong. She added that she had successfully fled his apartment, but that she was terrified that he might be following her. When asked her location, the caller replied she was in the area of Ocean Parkway and Oak Beach, a small community located on the eastern side of Jones Beach Island. Since Oak Beach is built around the small stretch of 15-mile-long Ocean Parkway, the dispatcher told the young woman to make her way to a well-lit, open space near the highway. The plan was to position the girl in such a bright and public place that it might deter her attacker from making a move, but it also allowed nearby police units to race down the highway until the caller could see and hear their blaring lights and sirens. Again, such police activity would surely deter any potential attackers. Towards the end of their conversation, the caller is said to have said to the dispatcher, "Okay, I can see the cops now, thank you so much." The dispatcher then relayed the information to the patrol car, telling them the girl would be just a few hundred yards ahead of them. The caller once again thanked the dispatcher, then hung up the phone, apparently just seconds away from flagging down the incoming officers. But those officers say they didn't see any female in their early 20s standing by the side of the parkway. In fact, they didn't see anyone at all. They continued to prowl up and down the highway for a while just to make sure they hadn't missed anything, but there was nothing. The cops in question hoped for the best. After all, there was a chance she'd been picked up by a friend or a coworker. Maybe she'd even caught a cab or found some other method of escape. But regardless, the girl's name and description were passed along to homicide and missing persons as a potential Jane Doe. 7 months later, their worst fears came true. On the morning of December 11, 2010, Officer John Myuu and his trained cadaver dog Blue were hard at work. They had been tasked with searching the surrounding area for any signs of the missing girl, and for the past half a year, they had been systematically searching and eliminating grid square after grid square in a comprehensive search for her remains. Over the course of the summer, he had unsuccessfully searched several gated beach communities in the area for any sign of the missing girl. But each time, despite scouring 1 or 2 areas that he thought were of particular interest, he had no luck. This wasn't for any lack of trying or skill either. Blue, his trusted German shepherd, was a veritable expert in finding decomposing bodies. Even if they had been buried up to a depth of around 6 or 7 feet, Blue would paw at the ground and bark, and he wasn't often mistaken. This is why, on that chilly December morning, when Blue began to alert towards the beach near Ocean Parkway, John trusted Blue to bring him results. Lo and behold, the decaying corpse of a 24-year-old female were found in an unmarked, shallow grave in the sandy earth. But that wasn't the only set of remains that Blue alerted to that day. Even with the thick vegetation and light layer of snow, the area on the opposite side of the highway proved to be nothing less than a graveyard, with Blue alerting every couple of feet. Not only were Shannon Gilbert's remains found, but the body of the missing Melissa Barthélemy was found, reduced to nothing more than a skeleton interred in a burlap sack. Police managed to recover 3 other bodies in the grassy area, that of Maureen Brainerd, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, and the missing Shannon Gilbert, who Officer Myuu had originally been looking for. All were within just 500 feet from one another. The following March, during the recovery of the other 5 bodies, the remains of one Jessica Taylor were found in a shallow grave at the side of Ocean Parkway. This was extremely worrying for investigators because what they only described as partial remains belonging to Jessica had been found 8 years earlier over in nearby Manorville. It was looking more and more likely that the cops had a serial killer on their hands, as 3 additional sets of remains were unearthed over the following month, including those of an unidentified female toddler, an unidentified Asian trans woman, and Valerie Mack, whose partial remains had been previously found in Manorville in November of 2000. Despite mounting evidence of a serial killer being at work, it took until November of 2011 for law enforcement to announce that they believed one person to be responsible for all 10 murders, that the person is most likely a native of Long Island, and that there'd be a $25,000 reward for any information leading to their arrest. As of December 2015, the Suffolk County Police had been assisted in the investigation by a number of FBI agents. The FBI stepping in was preceded by the disturbing revelation that former Police Commissioner James Burke had been blocking FBI involvement in the so-called Long Island serial killer murders, and had been doing so for years. Burke resigned shortly after the scandal broke, and his reasoning behind blocking the FBI is yet to be determined. But the fact that a man so high up in the police hierarchy could deny such cases of vital material and human resources is deeply confounding. Whether or not he was trying to cover up the murders, or it was foolish pride that had him eschewing any federal assistance, it's anyone's guess. But Burke was sentenced to 46 months in prison in November of 2016 on charges of assault and conspiracy. Local police and FBI agents worked steadily on the case for almost 2 years before a Suffolk County prosecutor announced that John Bittroff, a carpenter from Manorville, was suspect in at least one of the murders. Bitrolf had been convicted in May of that year of the murders of 2 female escorts in 1993 and 1994, and in June 2019, homicide detectives proposed steps to use genetic genealogy to identify the unidentified victims and possibly the Long Island serial killer himself. It's unknown that any such tests have taken place, but if they have, they certainly didn't implicate Bitrolf any further, as no further attempts to charge him seem to have been made. Those affected by the murders had to wait years for any additional information, but in January of 2020, Suffolk County Police released images of a belt found at the crime scene, one embossed with either the letters HM or WH, depending on the orientation of the belt, embossed in black leather. Police believe that the belt may well belong to the Long Island serial killer himself, but would not comment on exactly where the belt was found. However, they did mention the new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, and they had launched GilgoNews.com, a website enabling Suffolk County Sheriff's Office to share news and receive tips regarding the investigation. Even though John Bitrolf had a history of murdering working girls, the complete dearth of physical evidence means we're forced to consider other suspects in the murder of some, if not all, of the victims. Homicide detectives briefly considered Joseph Brewer, an Oak Beach resident, to be a suspect, given that he was one of the last people known to have seen Shannon Gilbert alive. It was he that apparently hired her as an escort from Craigslist on the night of her disappearance, and told police that shortly after Shannon arrived at his residence, she began acting erratically, and he made no contact with her after she fled his home. Shannon was reportedly seen running through Oak Beach, pounding on the doors of homes in Brewer's neighborhood. Around this time, Shannon called 911 saying that they were trying to kill her. Police, however, did not find any evidence of wrongdoing, and Brewer was quickly cleared as a suspect. It does raise the question, though, if she was looking for refuge, would she not have simply stayed at Joseph's place? Why expose herself at such an apparently perilous moment? It also came to light that just 2 days after Shannon was declared missing, an Oak Beach resident named Peter Hackett had telephoned Shannon's mother to inform her that he was taking care of her. When she asked what he meant by that, he told her that he ran a home for wayward girls. When pressed, he hung up. He flatly denied this phone call ever took place when the police paid him a visit, but investigators proved, though, that Hackett had indeed called Shannon's mother using his cell phone records. It seemed all too much of a coincidence that Shannon's body was found just a stone's throw away from Hackett's home residence, too, and her family have stated on multiple occasions that they believe he had something to do with their daughter's death. However, police later learned that Hackett had a history of inserting himself into or exaggerating his role in certain major events, and that he had done exactly the same thing with a number of other high-profile murders and disappearances around the wider New York area. Hackett later left town and seems to have been completely rolled out as a suspect by investigating police. This leads us back to former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke, who, if you remember, resigned his position and eventually went to prison for a series of corruption scandals. In December 2016, Shannon's family discovered that an escort had approached the police to state that she suspected that Burke might be connected to the Long Island serial killer case, confirming something they had long suspected. The escort stated that she had attended a party in Oak Beach in April of 2011, and it was at this party that she saw none other than James Burke in attendance. Not only did Burke proposition her at said party, but she also witnessed him engaging in some disturbingly violent behavior. According to her, Burke was seen dragging a woman of Asian descent along a carpeted floor by the hair. This appalling display was stopped by other partygoers, but the other girls present came to learn that Burke's violent behavior was caused by him being unable to climax during his time with the girl. The girl in question wasn't even a working girl, and the argument had only stemmed because he'd, according to her, tried to throw a few $100s at me following the encounter. I told him I wasn't a working girl, and that's when he got violent. It was evident that by this point, not only did Burke make a habit of soliciting and visiting escorts, he was also prone to violence whenever things didn't go his way. As of the time of writing, the identity of the Long Island serial killer remains a mystery, and for all we know, he is still very much at large. The disturbing aspects of former police chief James Burke's behavior might well just be a coincidence, and the Long Island serial killer might well turn out to be someone entirely different. But given his attempts to block FBI involvement, the murderer of 10 to 16 young women might well be one of his own blood relatives, perhaps an old friend of his who might at one point have been involved in law enforcement. It's certainly disturbing to discover an active serial killer, especially one with apparent ties to police corruption. And even though the killings seem to have subsided in the wake of intensive investigation, the Long Island serial killer may just be waiting and watching, biding his time, before he can strike again.
It's taken me a long time to tell this story. I'm 27 years old now, and this happened to me when I was 14. My name is Adam, and I have one older brother named Seth. I haven't seen Seth in 13 years. I have no idea where he is, or even if he's still alive, but I do know why he left. Seth was 2 years older than me, and we were very close. Although all brothers tend to get into scuffles with each other, with Seth and I, they were few and far between. For the most part, he and I did everything together. He taught me how to fish. He let me play football and baseball with him and his older friends. Although Seth was bigger and stronger than I was, he always sold me to other people like I was superior to him. He told people I was smarter than him. He told them I was the talented brother who was going to be so much more successful than anyone could dream of. I really loved him, and he was easily the best friend I have ever had. Around the time I turned 14, however, Seth began acting very odd. At first, I don't think my parents thought much of it. He was wearing black all the time and seemed like he was really depressed. Rather than hanging out with me or even his friends, he took to spending a lot of time alone in his bedroom. He obviously kept the lights off all of the time as well, because there were no lights coming from under the door. It may have seemed like typical 16-year-old boy sort of stuff, and that is likely why my parents didn't pay it any mind. But I was closer to Seth than they were. I knew him better than they did, and I knew that this was not typical teenage stuff. Hell, I was a teenager at the time, going through a lot of that myself. With Seth, it was something more. I would walk by his room at night, and I would hear him talking to someone. I never heard another voice, and I always chalked it up to the fact that he must have been talking on his cell phone. But the conversations were never pleasant. Whomever he was talking to, Seth was always at odds with that person. Whatever it was that was bothering my brother, he never told me. He never was angry with me either. He would say hello if I greeted him, and he always offered me a friendly, if not extremely worn-out smile. But rather than do anything else or say anything else to me, Seth would immediately go into his room, lock himself in there, and I wouldn't see him again for the rest of the day. After a couple of months of this behavior and no sign of stopping it, I was sitting at my computer doing some homework. I was having a difficult time with it, so I decided to take a break and chat with some friends on Yahoo Messenger. This was long before the days when Skype and Facebook were the norm. I got a message from an unknown user. I don't feel comfortable sharing the real name, so I will just call it Yahoo Stranger 1. This person sent me a message telling me, "If you don't keep far away from Seth, I'm going to kill you." At first, I was too alarmed to say anything, but after I composed myself, I messaged the person back. I told him that Seth was both my brother and my best friend, and I would hang out with him whenever I wanted. The person didn't respond. I kept sending him a message asking who he was, but he only responded, "You've been warned." I wanted to confront Seth about this, but he refused to talk about it. When I mentioned the message to him, there was a little bit of recognition in his eyes, but he just forced a very wary smile, tousled my hair, and told me there was nothing to worry about. He would take care of it. That was the very last time I ever saw my brother. The following day, he didn't come out of his room to go to school. I went up and knocked on his door at my mom's request, but he didn't answer. My parents tried to get him out of his room as well, but the door was locked and he didn't answer. My parents had to eventually pick the lock on the door, and when we went in, Seth wasn't there. What's more is that many of his things were gone, and there was a note on his bed that simply said, "Goodbye." My parents, of course, called the police and went through the whole missing child procedure. But it wasn't until I curiously turned on the monitor to Seth's computer that I got a little bit of information on what was going on. The very first thing I noticed was that Seth's Yahoo Messenger was up and there was an open conversation. The conversation was with my screen name, and Seth's screen name was Yahoo Stranger 1. It was him that had sent me that message. Seth had also left his cell phone behind. I suppose this was to keep our parents from being able to track him. Remember all those times I thought I heard him arguing on the phone with someone? He had no calls in his history other than from my parents. If he was arguing with someone, it was not on the phone. But the true scariness came from the fact that there was a long and detailed conversation on the Yahoo Messenger. It was between Yahoo Stranger 1 and the screen name that we knew was Seth's. The conversation was horrid. Yahoo Stranger 1 was telling Seth over and over again to hurt me. There were these grisly and disgusting things that the messenger was telling him to do, and Seth's responses were adamant that he loved me and he wasn't going to hurt me. There was a message that night, the one after I told Seth about what had happened, that was the scariest. Yahoo Stranger 1, who I assumed now was Seth, told Seth to kill me. Seth refused and argued with him and pleaded with Yahoo Stranger 1 to leave him alone. I could tell in the messages that the conversation was causing my brother a lot of pain. Trying to figure out how Seth could have been having an instant messenger conversation with himself, I looked at the timestamps of the messages, and each one was at least 5 minutes apart. He had the passwords saved on his messenger for both accounts. I figured he had to sign out and sign on both names repeatedly, answering the messages since Yahoo only allows you to send offline messages. I don't know if Seth is schizophrenic, or if he has dissociative identity disorder, or if Yahoo Stranger 1 really was a different person. But what I am sure of is that the constant threats against me were what was weighing heavy on my brother all those months. And I have no doubt that the reason my brother, my best friend, left was that he was afraid that he actually was going to hurt me. I keep hoping he'll come back one day. He's my brother, and I love him, and I could never be scared of him.